Hey everyone, welcome to What to Know Before You Buy a Markforged 3D Printer. We're going to do a panel discussion today. Again, my name's Jordan Swan. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm going to cover the final section, kind of recap everything that we go through. Marcus will kick us off today. He's based in Stillwater, Oklahoma. He is our content strategist. And then we also have Kyle Norman in Dallas, Texas, a Markforged application engineer. So let's get started. We have a lot of our customers when we're having a Markforged enterprise level 3D printer discussion that they get on their computer and they type in best 3D printer on the market and they get this list of hobbyist printers. We've noticed that for some, the line is becoming blurry between hobbyist printer and professional 3D printer. So, we felt that it was a worthwhile investment of our time and your time today to learn about the things that you need to consider before making that 3D printer investment. So the big question to be asking yourself here is, why can't I just buy a cheap printer with my company credit card and stick it in my office? And we think there's three things that you want to consider before you go forward with your company credit card and do this. The first one is, what are you going to be printing? Next, what is your time worth? And then last, how much do you actually want this to work? How much do you want this to actually work? So I want to pass it off to Marcus to work towards answering the question, what is it that you're going to be printing? Marcus, go ahead. Take it away.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, I'm really going to kind of approach this from an engineering and manufacturing perspective. Because depending on what you're printing, there are some things to think about, and there's some old school thought processes to kind of challenge. So the most common things we see with Markforged printers are prototypes, tooling, and low volume production. And each one of those offers very specific sets of value statements for your organization and tries to solve very specific challenges. So let's dig into each one of those a little bit more and talk about why you need to know which one you're doing and what you need to consider if you're going to do each one of these. The first one is prototypes, right? Why do we make prototypes? Well, we want to test fit, form, and function. And we'd like it to be quick and cheap. And that's like the obvious benefit statement for additive manufacturing, for 3D printing. The problem is, in the past, that was literally all those prototypes were good for. Does it feel good in your hand? And cool, let's go with it and let's tool up. But now with more production ready, durable 3D printing solutions, we can build a prototype and actually test it. So we can see, does this work? Does this thing function the way we want? We can take it out in the field. We can literally ship to the certification bodies like UL and CE units that are ready to roll with additive parts in them because they're strong enough to handle that. You can do full strength tests, cycle tests, and then from a sales perspective, you can build demonstrator models. I mean, the last thing you want to do is build a demonstrator model and take it to a trade show and have somebody mess with it and then break it because you've got a cheap part in there. With parts that are composite, that are just as strong as aluminum, or with metal printed parts, you can print parts with no tooling that are going to perform just as well as the full real thing. You can even look at building early shipments, especially like prototype models to send to key customers, and preparing for production. So ask more of your prototypes and expect more out of them and try to solve more of the problems that a prototype would solve than you would with a low cost, low strength 3D printed part. Tooling is another big one, and this one is like the sweet spot for Markforged, because a lot of times what we find is people will build or get a 3D printer and they'll build some tooling, and it's going to be kind of in this low impact, low risk area. And so you're going to be building, little jigs, you're going to be building concept models and prototypes, things that are handy, they're nice to have, but they're not going to make a big impact in your business. Once you get up into this higher level impact and the higher requirement stuff, that's where those hobbyist printers start to fall down. But with a printer that can absolutely crush all this other stuff. For example, bending and forming tools, service and maintenance tools, literally spare parts, maintenance parts, custom one-off production parts. This is the area where there's going to be a huge business impact. So down kind of the bottom left quadrant, that's where Markforged and every other printer kind of excels naturally. And what you want to look at is, do you want to create that limit where this thing never has the potential to, impact your business more than about the cost of the actual printed part itself? So low volume production is another big one that you want to kind of think about. Now, if you're going to do low volume production, you really need production quality equipment. The thing is, not everybody expects to go into low volume production. They expect that they're just building prototypes and it's going to never really come back around to be used again. But let's talk about a couple situations where low volume production actually is not sort of intended, but it just sort of happens that way. A big one is the early runs. So the sooner you cut tooling, the sooner you tool up your design in for production, you're sort of locking in and increasing the price of change. And so if you can 3D print those early runs, they tend to be low volume. They tend to be specifically sent out for feedback, things like that. If you can use 3D printing for early runs, and then during those early shipments, you can make sure this thing is a marketable product, and then tool up and be ready for kind of the big push. That early run production, low volume production, may never come back around to additive, but it's going to add tremendous value and aversion to risk in your product release. Design variance is another one. I did a series of medical gas outlets for a company once, and there was a bunch of different variants, maybe about 16 variants, but there was a handful of them that literally were like 1 or 2 quantity per year is what they were expecting. But we had to tool them up just the same as everything else. So we were never going to recoup the cost of those low volume variants, but we did need to have them, otherwise we wouldn't be able to offer the full line. So if you have this thing in your pocket, this low volume production option in your pocket, you could just say, well, we're not going to tool up these because they're all going to be extraordinarily low volume. We'll never recoup our costs. We're just going to additive print those on demand, and that's going to more than satisfy our needs and save us a whole bunch of time. Plus, you may end up with a design variant that you didn't expect. So you may have a part where everybody's running with the same, requirements, the same shapes, the same options, and then all of a sudden one comes along and they say, well, we want to do this. And in order to accomplish that variant, you've got to do a design change. Well, if you have additive as a backup production model, you can do the majority of it using hard tooling, high volume production techniques, and then do these one-off special things with low volume. It really is going to help your customers be successful and help you to create some loyalty within your customer base. And finally, supply chain redundancy is a big one. When COVID hit and when people were kind of looking around like, oh no, my supplier's gone or I can't get my shipments in, what do I do? 3D printing was really looked at as a savior for a lot of companies and a lot of parts. But for those of you that haven't gotten to this point yet, for those of you that haven't adopted 3D printing at all yet, you were not in a place to realize that. You were not in a place to have that redundancy built in. You've never built a 3D printed part. You've never used 3D printing. You have no confidence in it. You don't know how your parts are going to react to it. And so by not being involved early on, you don't have the ability to swap over to 3D printing to add redundancy to your supply chain. So COVID helped us to understand that being lean with your production and your fabrication is really not going to be a recipe for success going through difficult times. So for that, that's kind of from a parts perspective, but let's talk a little bit from the time perspective. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle, who's worked with, every kind of 3D printer imaginable, owns a bunch of these 3D printed parts or 3D printers. and he's going to talk a little bit about the time aspect of operating a 3D printer. Kyle, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Marcus. That's all excellent points. Yeah, so we're going to talk about what is your time worth, and ultimately, I see this time and time again, and I think this is one of the biggest unknown or rather overlooked hurdles in 3D printing today, and I like to call it some assembly required, and that there's multiple things under that topic. So first, let's kind of let's scrape the surface where I see a lot of people with the hobbyist style printer. So they adopt this mindset of, oh, I can buy this machine on my P card, I can slide it under that spending limit, and nobody will know, and they'll see this cool thing that I get put together. And so you order this thing on your P card, and it comes in, and you begin to steal an hour here and there every day from your projects, from your daily workload, just to get this thing put together. So as you get it put together, the next step is you kind of got to calibrate and tweak all the settings. So again, you're kind of stealing hours from other projects, and bear in mind, especially I see this time and time again, that you're paying an engineer a really nice salary to build a $1,000 printer, and you got to ask yourself, is it really worth it? What did you spend on that engineer? But at any rate, so we began tweaking this machine, and again, we're kind of stealing hours here and there, and we went out and we bought this spool of material out of Joe Blow's garage, and so now we got to get this machine tweaked to run this material, and there's going to be some software tweaking. So all this comes together. All right, we're ready to run a part. All right, so we get this part ready, and the boss is kind of looking at you. You're gonna have to run a couple of little tests to make sure that everything's printing okay. And well, we get that print off, and now the boss says, okay, let's switch materials. I want this out of a different material this time. Well, guess what? That tweaking starts all over again. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. That's going to bring me to my next point, and that's going to be beginning to talk. I get these calls all the time, and I get them more often than you think, really. And they say, "Oh my God, Kyle, can you help? That guy that built, ran, and kept our printer going, he quit. He just up and quit." Right? So don't know what happened. There's a story there, but don't know what happened, but he quit. So this is only going to be a concern when we've gone down a hobbyist printer path. So now someone has to pick up this printer and start all those steps that I just mentioned all over again. He's got to figure out how the printer was built, what makes this thing tick, how to tweak all of the settings, how to tweak all of the software. And more often than not, this is where I see the hobbyist printer fail. So this is where you begin to see, that printer that got stacked in the corner because nobody had the time to deal with it, right? They began to realize that time strain that it took to initially get it set up. So that's going to bring me over to my actual next point. So that guy, when that guy left, he uncovered that there is no single source accountability to create any type of reliability in your system, right? So what I mean by this is, we bought a filament off Amazon that came from Joe Blow's filament company based in his garage, and we have a machine that in theory can accept many different filaments, but will require heavy tweaking to consistently run the same material over and over again, just due to the lack of consistency in the material. And then we wrap all of this together with a open source slicer that did require some tweaking just to get it to work in the first place, but requires tweaking as you change materials, and is going to require different setups per material. This is where we begin to talk about Markforged ecosystem, when you look at the digital forge that Markforged creates, it gives you a single source accountability. So it gives you this out of the box reliability that should be expected from any enterprise level machine. Now let's talk about, did you yell at it? I know this sounds crazy, but when we talk about hobbyist printers, there's always a little bit of black magic going on, right? There's always the, oh my God, it ran perfect when I had that pencil stuck under the corner of the machine, or I had a rolled up napkin stuck behind it. And that's no way to live your life. You're essentially living in fear of that machine failing. This can be a huge limiting productivity factor. Unless your guy has this printer at home and he monitors it at night in his living room and on the weekends in his living room, which typically is not going to be the case. It becomes difficult to have a full enterprise level productivity scale, just because you don't necessarily trust that machine to run at night and on the weekends consistently. So this is going to bring me to my final point of support. So support is way more important than anybody really thinks. Ultimately, this all kind of bundles in the last couple of slides of support during setup, operation, and troubleshooting. And God forbid, if you do have a failure, a single point of support contact is the best and most effective way to implement additive manufacturing and keep it consistently running in your business. And this is because if you were to call Markforged with a problem, let's say your problem appears to be with the filament. Hey, I got some bad filament. But as it turns out, it ends up being the machine, right? What's not going to happen is us go, hey, you need to contact that filament guy, or, oh, sorry, you're going to have to contact the manufacturer. Good luck with that. So when you have multiple suppliers, it becomes difficult to troubleshoot a problem just due to consistency. So with that kind of wraps up my time section. I want to hand it over to Jordan. He's going to talk about 3D printing successes and things to look out for. So take it away, Jordan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle. So, I think I heard this analogy a while ago that I want to become an expert in using front end loaders, so I'm going to buy a shovel. The parallel isn't exactly there in that case, and we're going to see a little bit of that at play here with the hobbyist printer versus an enterprise printer. The key question to ask yourself is, how much do I want to be successful here? So, it's not a crazy leap to say, hey, we want to get into 3D printing, but let's buy and tinker with a cheap little hobbyist machine and kind of see how that goes first before we move into an enterprise grade 3D printer. And here on the next slide, the point that I wanted to make is I can't tell you how many manufacturers I've walked into their shop and, I ask them what kind of 3D printer. Oh yeah, we've got a 3D printer that we use. And really it's just this empty box that's taking up space. It ends up in the catch-all storage closet. It's covered in dust because no one's used it. Maybe like Kyle mentioned earlier, someone left somebody quit, and then it was going okay because he would spend in that hour or 2 hours per day getting it to work, but now he's gone and no one wants to take it on. So it's a complete waste. Everything he had done was in vain. On this next slide here, let's talk a little bit about the $20,000 printer, enterprise printer, like a Markforged printer versus that $1,000 hobbyist printer. For one, a $20,000 printer, when you purchase that, it's on the radar. So if someone quits, it's not going bye-bye and going into a catch-all storage closet. It's a serious investment. A 1,000 printer doesn't come with the support, and it's not going to be taken serious like a enterprise grade Markforged 3D printer will. The example here, this is a CE certified fixture that's carrying these very, very heavy parts around a factory. The CE test in itself can be a $20,000 investment. But the thing to know is that you're not even going to look at an application like this with a hobbyist printer, okay? It wouldn't even come into your mind, let's try and print a fixture out of PLA or PETG and lift $1,000, a 1-ton part, because if you tried that, you know you're going to fail. And ultimately, that hobbyist printer it's a toy. And with that, another, on the cloud, off the cloud is, something that we talk a lot about, folks that look at Eiger. But what you need to know is that your hobbyist printer is, you don't consider security. It's just, this is non-existent. It's not something, to a certain degree, it's not something you think about. When you're dealing with manufacturers with $1 million intellectual property, proprietary parts, this is important. The U.S. Marines have over 50 machines deployed all across the country. Through ISO 27001, we know that your data is safe. It's not going to be lost. Okay, the data is secure. It won't be leaked, and it's going to be accessible. The system's not going to go down on you. And then here on the next slide, in addition to that, when we talk about software, reporting becomes crucial with a 3D printing initiative that's going to have impact on the business. And this is minimal to non-existent with the hobbyist grade printer. Okay, it's not really worth tracking a $1,000 printer to begin with. So you're not going to be able to see what materials are they using. Are the printers online? And when we're dealing with companies that have satellite locations scattered all throughout the country, you kind of want to know what's happening. And as additive manufacturing becomes more ramped up, being able to track it and see where we're doing in terms of the ROI becomes a significant piece of the puzzle. So Eiger Markforged proprietary software shows you exactly what's happening with one printer when you're just getting started. But as you scale things up and you've got 10 or 15 or 50 printers, you can see exactly what's going on, how much material is being used, who's using what, are we on track to get that ROI, or have we reached ROI already? And then, with that Eiger platform, file management is going to be another piece of this. I talked about those satellite locations that are scattered all over the place. And when you're dealing with those hobbyist printers, you may have taken the time to get a part right and maybe even shown some degree of repeatability on that single 3D printer, but then you try and scale it, bring another printer in, and for some reason, it doesn't go right. Your repeatability is crucial if you really want to get stuff done and be able to get return on investment. And your slicing settings, the different versions of the parts, all the different users that are coming in, and and changing things up. You need to be able to know what's happening engineer to engineer internally so that you can get that repeatability in Georgia or Texas or California every time. Going back to what I talked about earlier, knowing that your data is safe and it's not going to be lost, that it's secure, it won't be leaked, and that it's accessible and the system's not going to go down on you. And that kind of leads me to my next point of safety. I can't tell you how many hobbyist 3D printers out there go up in flames. Make sure you spend what you didn't spend on an enterprise printer in insurance. People have this happen at home all the time. I've heard, I was so lucky with my hobbyist printer. I happened to be in the room because the thing caught fire. There's some pretty neat videos out there if you've got some free time and can go into the whole of Reddits and subreddits. But yeah, so what sort of happens? The material that you bought from Joe Blow, this guy Joe Blow, that hopefully Kyle's not buying his materials from him. He sells you a spool, it jams up in the nozzle, and then the printer just keeps printing for hours and hours. There's no safety net in place, and then things just heat up and ultimately spark, and you've got a burnt down a printer that's caught flames, a garage, you name it. So think about that before you go and buy that hobbyist printer. Do I want to burn down the building? So let's kind of recap what we talked about. Marcus sort of kicked things off with, what are you going to be printing? If it's going to be prototypes, if you're going to be in that R&D world, does success matter? Are you going to be able to move this into a functional prototype or end use part? And the answer is probably no with those hobbyist printers. Whereas with an enterprise printer, that's definitely in the realm of possibilities. You can move things out of prototype land, out of just, the roughest of concept that you're going to probably have to redesign for manufacturing anyways, to either getting closer to the end part in the prototyping world or moving into the end part itself. And then how much, what is your time worth? We don't want to say that you can't do anything useful with those hobbyist printers, but because you can. I know Kyle's got a few of them in his garage. A lot of our engineers have hobbyist 3D printers, but when they go to use those printers, they've got a full Saturday and hours to burn, and sometimes weeks before they get the part right. And that, I don't think I would want to hire someone to tinker with a hobbyist 3D printer all day. And then last, how much do you actually want this to work? Do you want an empty box taking up space, collecting dust? Or do you want to know that you're going to be able to get consistent results with that repeatability, like with the Markforged printers? So, to kind of conclude, why can't I just buy a cheap printer with my company credit card and stick it in my office? You can, you really can, but I think that we did a pretty good job of showing what you're up against if you're going to go that route and buy that hobbyist printer.